Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVM LP Asheville, 103.7, and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Devine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. And Robin Collier, thank you for doing the same, managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to start. We also have a free community gathering on Saturday morning at noon Eastern Time, and on Thursday afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We gather with a group of writers, and we generate writing for an hour, so it's great fun. So today I have a guest on whom I've known for quite a while. Her name is Marilyn Ball. She has a podcast which she broadcasts in Asheville titled Speaking of Travel. And Marilyn has been very active in the Asheville area, and I invited her to come on today to reflect on what's going on in Asheville right now. And even though the hurricane and all of the destruction that's happening in the Asheville area, the western North Carolina area, has faded a bit from the news, it's still very present in my hometown and my home region, western North Carolina and Asheville. So I've invited Marilyn to join us today to reflect on her experiences around the hurricane and also talk a bit about what she's doing with her podcast. So I began this conversation by asking Marilyn how it's going. And she starts in a place you might expect, talking about emotions. So here you go, Marilyn Ball, her reflections on Asheville.
There are a lot of emotions. Listening to a lot of Amy Winehouse. Trying to find a rhythm that works in such horrid surroundings. And you know, and I know, and this is certainly what we'll talk about, is that the trees are our life. To see them so damaged, it's like a revelation that life is going to go on, but in just such a different way.
The world has peacefulness and disruption every single minute. We just happen to be able to witness it a little more closely in western North Carolina or wherever you are if you've ever witnessed any disruption.
Well, I basically grew up. You really grew up here, of course, generations. But when I came, I felt that was it was a rite of passage. For me, I was 23, almost 24 years old, barefoot and pregnant, going to live on top of a mountainside that had little to no resources, but a huge forest that would give us everything we would ever need forever. That's truly what we believed. The forest became our canopy of togetherness and community. I always felt like we were under a canopy of living right in the forest for all those years and raising a child and having dogs and cats and wildlife, and was always watching the pine cones fall and seeing over time a new sprout coming up of these majestic pine trees and the oak trees, and how nature moved according to the wind and the water. It was all part of a dance going on. I don't mean to wax poetic here, Jim, but it was.
And you know, the forest did give you what you needed forever, and it still does. What you actually get from that sort of meditative experience within the context of the canopy of trees, you have internal insight. Doesn't matter whether you're standing on a corner in a big city or beside a stream somewhere far away from the Appalachian Mountains or in the flatlands of Kansas, you still have the changing sensibilities the forest taught you.
I think that's the key word right there, is sensibilities. And we all have it. And that's what we're seeing today is, let's be sensible here. What's going to work to get all this mud out? How many people will it take to move this tree? What's it going to take? They're working together like that, the way nature intended it to be, which is really a beautiful thing to see.
So you are back in Asheville, and you are in the studio, I see behind you, on air, which suggests that you still have the on-air opportunities of your radio show, Speaking of Travel, which airs on 570 AM WWNC.
And WWNC, I'll just put a big shout out to I consider my colleagues. As soon as the emergency happened, there were a number of people there who stayed, and they turned on the radio, WWNC, as best they could. They've done stories about them. They'll probably win an award. And if you remember, being a native of Asheville and talking about listening to WWNC when you were a child, listening to Chuck or whoever read the paper, and they did that. They went back to that format. They are keeping it going 24/7. They stayed there and kept the radio going. And there were a lot of people who had battery-operated radios, and they could hear them. They could hear Blue Ridge Public Radio, and they could hear WWNC 570 AM, our stomping ground. And they're heroes now, because what they're doing is just like what they did back in the day when people would sit around and listen to their radio. They're getting news about their loved ones, what's happening in the coves, what's happening where they can't see, and really keeping the calm and the community alive. It's a very beautiful thing.
57.0 WWNC airs all over Western North Carolina. How far is the reach?
As far as I know, it goes as far west as like the Cherokee Indian Reservation, even into Murphy. 570, of course, is an AM station. So AM reaches kind of different waves, I think. But you can stream it too today. There are different ways that you can listen to it. But they are really in still that emergency mode. I don't know that they're doing community programming just right now.
Because it is a commercial station, really. When you advertise, when you do your podcast, you advertise every 10 minutes, you take a break and you do some ads, and then you come back and you run the whole show for an hour. Speaking of Travel is the name of your show. So it's a commercial station, and yet now they've defaulted to a community station in a sense. I guess they still probably run ads, but they fill in their programming with all the assistance people need to figure out what to do next. So what's your take on Asheville and the surrounding areas? How does it feel? How does it look? What's your sense of it?
It's very painful, for one thing. It's also, like we were talking about, there's an enchantment to it. Some people might disagree, but just seeing the spark of people is beautiful. But knowing the loss of people and having to start all over again and be so scared and frightened, emotions that we're not used to up here in the mountains, our generation, many generations were, but we certainly weren't. Although I think sensibility, like you talked about, is a part of why this community even is around and is helping each other.
What are some of the things you've seen that give you a sense of optimism in the midst of all of this reconstruction or reorganization or getting over the shock of it? What are people doing that works, that you really are proud of, and you might even address on your show, speaking of travel? Because if this is not a journey, I don't know what it is, Marilyn. Come on.
I agree. And I feel proud even that I have a platform that I can tell these stories and get these stories out there and be witness to these stories. Bravery has taken on a whole new meaning to me. my show is all about bravery in a way, getting on a plane and going to another country, but wading in a river and finding dead bodies is different. It's a different journey, and it's really happening here. So the level of taking that journey of fear up a notch is brave and challenging. Takes a lot of guts. And we're seeing that in people, and that gives me hope.
Do you have a specific story or two you've heard or seen that can give us a deeper sense of what you're offering us?
It really is more stories that I'm hearing from like the high country. I spent a lot of time in the high country because what I did with Bob Kelso, and I'll put this out there because I don't know a lot of people know this, but Bob Kelso and I with Kelso Advertising on Walnut and Lexington Avenue since 1991, worked with every county in Western North Carolina, all 25 counties. At a time when the room tax was just emerging and these small mountain towns had some money, not much, mostly mom and pop hotels on the side of the road, the Wigwam Hotel in Cherokee. I mean, it was that time. It was like, okay, now you have a little money, and the Cherokee came in. Joyce Dugan was the chief at that time. She said, we're going to do marketing. We're going to have a marketing committee. It's going to be made up of all the small cabin owners, and we're going to learn how to use travel and tourism as an economic driver. And over the past 30 years, that worked. Those counties became economically stable. They had shops. They had economic development, which was something we had helped them with. They had a style of life that we all enjoyed. And they're gone. They're literally gone, Jim, off the map. I mean, Marshall, we all went to the old Marshall jail. Who didn't go to the string music on the corner there in Marshall? People would drive up from Asheville to go to those old-timey string bands up there. Marshall was a happening place. Beautiful people, beautiful stuff going on. And you go even higher, you get up into Banner Elk. You get up into Boone. The devastation is real there. All 25 counties that I worked with have been damaged in one way or another, some worse than others. Chimney Rock, the Village, they were the first sponsors on Speaking of Travel, Chimney Rock. We did a huge campaign. I was down there all the time with their marketing people. The people who lived and worked there loved that energy and that town and that lake and that bridge, the little flowering bridge. It was a town, right? It's gone. I've told people this. It's not just we will rebuild. There will be rebuilding sometime, but they won't rebuild that. It would have to be a movie set. I keep listening to Richard Burton singing Camelot. I feel like once there was a spot that was known as Camelot. It was Western North Carolina. And we'll all hold that in our memory. We will. We'll be the people who will always hold that in the memory. And now, like nature does, it will sprout new.
You can help us understand a bit better. I, of course, grew up in Western North Carolina, and I played in the woods. I have a sense of the rhythm of the seasons, how it feels in all weather conditions. I certainly never experienced what Asheville just experienced with this hurricane. You've traveled more throughout Western North Carolina than I have. You have covered the ground from Asheville City, Hendersonville, Brevard, all of the towns around Asheville, Waynesville, Murphy, Cherokee, on and on it goes. Can you give the listeners outside of the Asheville region a sense of what it's like back up in the mountains, the essence of that feeling that's there that people have known for centuries, really, because people have been there for ages. Cherokee Nation was there before the people came in by way of the French Broad River and settled Asheville as a trading post. What's it like back up in the mountains, and how do you think it's going to recover or change? Give us some reflections.
Well, reflections will be emotional reflections, and I'm okay with that because I thank you for letting me have this opportunity to talk about that. Nobody's ever asked me that. And I feel like I'm a culture keeper myself. Nobody just ever thought of it that way. And I say that because in 1991, when you looked at a map of North Carolina, it ended in Asheville. And the rest of the state looked like wilderness. Because it was wilderness. But it really wasn't because people lived in that wilderness. They lived in that wilderness for generations. And suddenly, that room tax happened. You know, there's the whole history of Asheville and paying off their tax and what are we going to do to market? And they were able to go to the state and get this law that there was an occupancy tax that every guest at every hotel would pay that would only be used for marketing. That's it. So that they would have an image. And you remember Price McNabb, they were the leaders in that. They had Biltmore and they had McDonald's and they had all the big brands that were just emerging. Everybody was emerging. Some just emerging bigger than others. And Asheville was the biggie. But there were all these other places that were suddenly getting those room tax too. And Bob Kelso, my business partner, who loved Western North Carolina so much, said, let's go visit these people who suddenly have money and see what we can do to help them and have a business. And so we did. And we literally knocked on doors. I mean, because I was friends with Becky Anderson and other people who were from Appalachia. Bob and I did not feel like outsiders, like we were carpetbaggers. We felt like we were dreamers and hope builders and teachers and community builders and all of those things that we were witnessing ourselves. They were already doing. We were just going to give them a way to do it bigger so that people would come and see their church. Like we had meetings with them. What was important about their town that they loved about their town that we could promote so that somebody in Ohio would want to come to Bryson City and see that or take that train ride or raft down a river. Oh my God. Here you can do all that. You can go on zip lines. We were showing them that they had product. We were there to help them leverage their dollars so that they could do it together. They had to learn how to do it. I was a Montessori teacher before I was in marketing, so I looked at this as an opportunity like a teacher. Remember when you were little and you had to cooperate in the sandbox? Like that was something that you learned. Over the years, you forget and you get insulated in your silo of yourself. What if you took your resources and shared that with your neighbors and you all came together to create a brand around coming here, and then you do your own marketing, little hotel or little cabin. You do whatever you can do, but in the meantime, we're going to drive people here to see the beauty. And it worked. And I feel that what's happening right now out that way is they're doing it again. They're doing that again. They're working together. They're figuring out how to bring people there and clean up and make it a place where people are going to want to come and be. And the Cherokee really, just to give a shout out to the Cherokee, who I worked with for 20 consecutive years through the beginning of even before they had a casino, all through the building of the casino, all through the next 20 years with their HR people to get people to go to work there because that was their economic driver. And we witnessed them so much tragedy, triumphantly being able to create education for their children, diets for their people, communication and mental health, all the things that had been lacking, they created with that gaming revenue. They were able to create an infrastructure where their children gained higher education and have come back and are now the emerging leaders there. We have a lot to be proud of our Cherokee Nation right next door, and a lot we can all learn from them again, like 10,000 years later.
So 10,000 years later is right now. Can you reflect a bit more deeply on what's going on with you right now?
I, like so many other people in this region, are addressing their grief in different ways. My way was to leave town. I left 2 days after the storm with my family, and we went to Charlotte and just rested our souls. Their children, and we just felt that it was best. We had no utilities. We didn't know, but we had done a drive around. I live in Weaverville, and it was so terrifying, Jim. You can't even imagine how terrifying it was just in my neck of the woods. I couldn't even imagine what it was like. And we had no way to find out because we were cut off. So we left and came back when the power came on. And then I have water because I have a well. And so, knock on wood, I am a lucky one. I guess I'll always be called. Maybe they'll have a little symbol for that someday that you'll pin on your door, a lucky one. And to be honest with you and your listeners, I have been really paralyzed with fear to go see those places. I don't have a firsthand account of those places, but I have a firsthand account of my place, and I have personal friends and people who are living that right now. We don't have to see it per se, and they really would rather you not go to those places, but we do know they're gone. I'm not ready to see that yet.
Yeah, I get it. Seeing something like that does take a little bit of preparation, if you will, spine, if you will, and many, many things are gone, and yet so much endures. You mentioned the Cherokee Nation. I was wondering if you might reflect on the Cherokee Nation a bit and how that can help us understand how this land endures and what it means to be on the land.
When you think about the Cherokee, have been in the Appalachian Mountains, which is most of the South, what they believe is 10,000 years. The Cherokee believe that a great buzzard came down and flapped its wings and created the mountains. And they created all of the mountains as their mother. It was their motherland. They claim they've been here 10,000 years. And over, the course of time, as the settlers came in and claimed a lot of that land, that paradise and that beautiful landscape, things started to just grow into communities. And the Cherokee have a 56,000 wall of boundary. They live over there, and we've got little townships that the pioneers had started back in the 1700s as they came over. This region was one of the last regions to be settled because they couldn't get over those mountains. So finally, the Davisons, the Pattons, the people that you probably knew growing up were the original settlers who came into Western Carolina via the Shenandoah River, the mother lode of all rivers right there. And that beautiful valley, surrounded by the ancient mountains. How could it get any better than that? The Shenandoah River was definitely one of the selling points for them to settle in that valley, was that they had that water. The French Broad, what is that? The second oldest river in the world? That's pretty old.
I believe you're right. The French Broad River is one of the oldest rivers in the world. It starts at the headwaters up around Rosamond and flows 218 miles through Asheville, on west toward Tennessee, and eventually ends up being part of the Tennessee River. It flows on to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico.
So, yeah, I think this region, just by nature of geography, was blessed with water. And that was crucial to settlers back in those days. So other people started to come, like the Scotch and the Irish, who themselves were being run out of their countries for whatever reasons, and looking at these beautiful mountains as kind of their home, like they felt comfortable here and they could settle here. And then over time, more and more cultures came here and really just lived together like a community. They created that vibe that has always been here, with the different art and the different music and the different flavors. And I think that's always been a part of the draw here. A lot of people believe that Western North Carolina is like a vortex. Do you think that?
I have no idea if it is or not. I haven't experienced the vortexes in the way a lot of people do. I can tell you, when I'm there, I feel gravity. I feel located. I feel birth home. I sense the environment communes with me and I commune with it. Is it a vortex? It's beyond my pay grade. I have no idea. I'll let that be whatever it is. I will say, though, I am drawn to the place where I was born, the way the ground smells, the way the leaves change in the fall, the vastness of it all. And this may be one thing that people here in the West, in Taos, if they've never been east, might not realize. If you get on an airplane, and since you do your podcast and your radio show, speaking of travel, you talk to a lot of people who fly in and out of Asheville. Well, if you fly north to Newark and then on from there to wherever you go, or fly north to JFK or to LaGuardia through some of the airlines that travel direct to New York from Asheville, you'll look down and you'll see some rolling mountains and some hills, and quickly you'll move out of the mountains and fly over the Piedmont, and off you go, New Jersey, and you finally land. If you fly out of Asheville and you go to Chicago, you fly west, little northwest, and you're traveling out. And it's not long after the plane lifts up and gets a bit of elevation, you can look down, and what do you see? You see the Smoky Mountains. You see those mountains that we're talking about, all of those counties you traveled in, and all of those counties that are still there with the roads washed out, with the people wondering what to do next. Resilience is there. These are mountain people. What will they do next? They'll get a mule and go help their neighbors. What will they do next? They'll grab a shovel and clean up the road if they can. If they don't have a shovel, they'll pick up the rock with their hands and move it. And then they'll go down the street and pick up the rocks in the driveway of their neighbors, and they will move it. And it won't matter what political party these people are involved in. None of that will make any difference. So when you're flying out of Asheville, going north towards Chicago, or northwest, really, and you look down, you see a vast expanse of mountains. You could call it a wilderness because you don't see many houses there. And it's miles and miles and miles flying. You see this. It's not walking or driving. 15, 20, 30 minutes flying out of North Carolina through that area. That's probably how long it takes in the jet to cross over that much land. And that's the size of it. So here in the West, you see the vast distance, the horizon to the west, out over the Taos Mesa, 50, 60 miles you can see. Can't see that in Asheville. You walk out, what you see is, you see trees, you see a forest, you see no horizon. Of looking down, it's that vast. And in that vastness, you find all of these people living. And they're dealing with Camelot, which is no longer there, or maybe in the minds of the folks who live up in those mountains, this is just how Camelot looks, and sometimes it changes form. But if you talk to any of those people carrying those rocks to their neighbors, they will say, this is Camelot. Just has some trees down that it didn't have last week, but they'll grow back, and we've been here 7 generations, and so will we.
Well, I traveled to Cuba many years ago, 20 years ago, to a very small fishing village in the southern part of Cuba. It was Pilon, little town called Pilon. And I spent 2 weeks there among the people who lived there, the farmers and the fishermen and women, and the little town there, where they had mules and people came down. There was mountains there. It was the Sierra Maestra Mountains. They were as big as the Great Smoky Mountains in the peak, which was unusual for an island to have such a high peak, but it did. And it was very similar in vegetation to the Great Smokies and the Blue Ridge, very similar. The people who lived there, they brought their sick down with a mule train or they brought their sick down from the mountain. But that's where people lived. And in Appalachia, living where I live, that is the way people live all over this region. They live up in the mountains where their people have been for generations. And there have been, the earth was very shaken. Let's just put it that way. The earth really shook. It was like a blow. If we did a series and we started talking to people about their story of where were they, what was it like at that time, then you would recognize that everybody had some kind of story to tell, like 911. It was a natural disaster. Just to make sense of it for the people who might not know, this made sense to me. When you look at Mount Mitchell, and you could probably pull up how high it is, it's one of the highest peaks east of the Mississippi River, right? Elevation very high. As far as geography goes, that's the headwaters, right? The water comes off that mountain and it goes down. And it would go down into a reservoir and the water would filter in. That's the water that's used for Asheville that builds up into that reservoir. And basically what happens, the elevation changes a couple of thousand feet, but from where the reservoir is all the way down to where Chimney Rock is a big, vast elevation. Like Chimney Rock was at 1,100 something feet, whereas Mount Mitchell is way up here. So that water had nowhere to go. It went down to the reservoir, which then toppled over because there was such a volume, and it created that ocean of water that washed down all the way down. Chimney Rock was kind of the brunt of it. And it created landslides as it went down. It created every kind of natural disaster that you could imagine. And I truly believe that what I'm looking at through somebody else's video, perhaps, really is true. That there really are people out there donating, and there really is Jose Andres, World Kitchen is here, and the FEMA is here, and they're all here working on it. And I just, in a way, feel like wake me up when it's over.
I want to touch on a slightly delicate subject, which would be a bit political, and you don't have to go too far into this. We're hearing lots of conspiracy theories floating around about this and that happening. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on those, because so much of it strikes me as untrue. One of the biggest examples would be somebody's controlling the weather and they diverted it to Asheville because they want to keep people from voting. It's such a joke to me, because what I know of the Asheville people and the Western North Carolina people, my people, that's just not what they do. They're not out there being conspiratorial. They're out there assisting.
It's funny, not funny, but that got started immediately for some reason, those kind of rumors. Like, as we gasped out our doors at the total destruction of what happened, people were helping each other immediately. It's like you didn't know what else to do but to look at somebody else's circumstance and help them as best you could, help yourself, help them. I mean, the first few days was really harsh because it was disconnected. People were disconnected. And that causes a lot of different emotions that we've never felt before, especially when we're addicted to our phones. I mean, I was with literally on a inflatable mattress as deep down in my basement as I could, praying that my power wouldn't go out so I could watch the Weather Channel and see what other people were going through, because it was really bad. We knew it was really bad. It was almost like, remember when you were a kid and you were in a tent and you did a walkie-talkie with your best pal, right? What's going on over in your neighborhood? Well, we were like that with Facebook and with other social people. Whoever could do it, did it. It was like, hey, we're here. We're okay. It was terrifying. And the very first day, somebody called me and said something about something ridiculous. It was such a rumor. And I said, you know that people are dying, right? You know that our houses have been cut off and literally floating down the river, right? And you're telling me that these trucks had their tires slashed in Kentucky because it was a red state? What are you even talking about? You're an idiot. Click. And I said, that is not going to happen. And then it did. And you know what? It's all, we are here to say it. It's lies. The people are on the ground. They are working it. They are going up into those coves just like paratroopers. You know, it's like something out of a sci-fi movie. And again, I don't think it's AI. I think it's really happening down the street because I could see a helicopter land. I think people will tell you that they are homeless. I think you can go to the River Arts District where 300 artists displayed their work, where we went to the Marquee, that really cool little art gallery, and drank coffee and went to the Grail. We loved the Grail so much. And the Wedge, Tim, you know, and everybody. I went there to get my Poetry on Demand by Eddie Cabbage. I loved him. He sat with a typewriter. That's gone. All gone. Right? Bottle Riot, my friend Laurie's place down in the river. We loved going there. It's just different. It's just, it's going to get cleaned up and new things will sprout, just like they do in the forest, right?
I can't imagine that it wouldn't be any other way. People do that. I remember the River Arts District when my grandfather worked at the Farmers Federation, which is now where the Wedge is located, the original Wedge there by the railroad tracks. And I remember going down to the Farmers Federation when he was selling farm machinery to all the folks in the counties all around Western North Carolina. He did travel like you did to take the farming equipment back into the mountains. And those buildings were active enough in the 50s, full of tobacco warehouses, little factories, whatever happens. And I do remember floods. When I was a boy, we had floods. I remember there was a flood in 78 that covered quite a bit of the area, but nothing like what we had just now. I don't know what will happen to the River Arts District. I don't know if people will build back because clearly it's in the floodplain. And I'm thinking of the big brewing company there just under the Smoky Park Bridge. When they built that right along the river, there was much talk about how to keep the flood from coming into their factory. We'll build a great wall and the flood won't overcome the factory. I'm wondering, did that work, or did that factory get washed not away, but did it get flooded?
Well, I think it did get damaged, but I'm really not sure of the extent. However, what goes on in my mind is that one of the reasons why these breweries came here, New Belgium, Sierra Nevada, you know, they bought Wicked Weed, the Budweiser company, is because of the water, this beautiful water. And yeah, there was some E. coli in Section 2T of the French Broad at some point. You know, there was always from Wilma Dykeman times, be careful of our river. We love our river, but if you don't take care of our river, it will harm you. And it wasn't that the river was there to harm us. It was that it was inundated by a natural disaster. It was never, that was never expected, that such raging water could happen and take over that. Because I remember when Riverlink started, and Karen Chronolian was her name. She had such a vision for the river and the whole way that the transition happened from, like, I don't know if you ever knew Helene Green. She started the Candle Station. Remember the Candle Station? Mm-hmm. And there was a little Mexican restaurant out there too. And she and her sister Trudy, and they eventually went down to the River Arts District where it was factories to see if they could use one of those warehouses to do their make their candles there. And eventually, I don't know if it was Mr. Slossman, it might have been, sold that river. It became Riverview Station, I think. And, you know, that's when the transition started, that artists had a place to go, and they did. We loved it. It was so nice to have that as part of our community, that whole artistic But people I'm not kidding. Every day, it seems, I can go online and see there are people playing music. There are people giving away free food. There's activities going on all over the place with creative people. And someday I'm going to venture out, maybe later today, and see that for myself.
Well, speaking of venturing out and what you do creatively in Asheville, you do have a very well-established podcast, speaking of travel, and you've been doing it a long time. You were involved with Leaf Global Arts. The Leaf Festival has been canceled, sadly, and Jennifer Pickering, I hope to have her on air as well, talking about her experiences in this arena. You do a great job with that podcast, and you are making your living doing it, and you're on your feet. Here you are back in Asheville, and I see that you're in your studio with your headphones on, and I don't think you're going to stop anytime soon. Can you give us a sense of where you are going now with your radio show, what you would like to do with it? How have you changed your sensibilities around it? What's it going to do for you and for us as we go forward with your art?
Again, I think I have been able to see that in a lot of sense, I am a culture keeper. I love storytelling so much. From the time I was a kid, I just wanted to tell stories and hear from people's moms. Where's your people from? Where'd you come from? It was a curiosity. That's the bottom line. It was curiosity. And we're all curious when we're kids, but I learned that when you get older, you forget. You don't do curiosity isn't such a thing. And the older you get, the less curious you become, and why it's such an important thing to always honor that inner child. And I think that's a big part of what the healing experience is all about for everybody. And I feel for me, just like during COVID, I have a travel show. Why would people want to talk to me about travel when they were sitting in their, parents' garage, not being able to go anywhere, right? Like, what are we doing here? I'm a digital nomad. Now I'm sitting in Connecticut. Well, they wanted to talk, and they wanted to talk about their inner journey because they were quiet for the very first time. They weren't going zigzagging all over the world. They were sitting with themselves. And I feel like over the last couple of years, people have really emerged from that in a very positive way. However, my show has always been, I even went back to look, because it's 11 years now, quietly talking to people about climate change. I put it into the guise of travel, because if we aren't paying attention to being sustainable and being responsible and sensible, given the nature of the numbers, things didn't look good. We kind of had to pay attention. And so I tried to bring people in who could really address that from a perspective that they've been there, done that. Here it is. Here's a solution. Let's do that. Even during COVID, I interviewed children. I felt it was important for children to talk about how they felt. How did they feel going forward? How are we going to look at our lives after a pandemic and be able to say, you know what, we learned a lot. We tried new things. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed who have told me about a new life they live, a new project they do. Beautiful creative stuff came out of all of that. And so I kind of feel like that cannot end. What we have left is so precious. We need to keep it. We need to keep it for these kids who are suddenly not even in school. Seriously, like school is closed indefinitely. That's what is the truth in this region of the world. Public school is closed. What do you do with a kid? Think about that. That's a whole nother conversation you can have. But, we have to think about the children and be good models for them and teach them every day, whether it's going outside, crawling under the tree that fell and looking at the root. Whatever, that's going to be a really important part of the next step, is being able to look at how we can move forward and keep that message alive, to turn off your light. I'm bringing in the big guns. I want to talk to some people who are global change makers, who are doing the work already, who have been able to see change happen and teach people how to be warriors themselves, right? How we can be, one person can make a difference that becomes mainstream.
And you say warrior. I've been thinking about that word a lot. I know what it means when you're on the front lines with a rifle in your hand. I know what it means when I watch the movies of the great hordes coming across the fields and clashing with their swords in some raucous Game of Thrones battle, the warriors. When you say warrior, what are you getting at? And we can move toward our close with this sensibility.
I always look at that, and I think it's because I did work with children for so long, of being a warrior in conquering all obstacles, being able to jump over holes or puddles that we didn't think were possible to jump over, or building something out of nothing. Like, I love watching kids and seeing them with a pile of clay and suddenly they see something emerge. And, that always gives me joy. And I think it's being able to find that joy in all the little things even that we do. That's going to be a big part of it, is being able to be so grateful, I think is the word that I'm looking for. And using that gratefulness to be as strong as you possibly can. I've talked to so many people who have done work with communication with children and helping them learn how to be confident in the way that they talk and be able to put themselves in someone else's shoes and tell their story as if it were their own. Okay? When that happens, then you get a sense of empathy and compassion. And we need to grow that like a pine tree.
Oh, so nicely put. You've given me some insight to the question I asked. When you have the wars, one other thing a war offers is the unknown, the doubt, the destruction, the emotional tones that come with such a struggle. What we had happen in Western North Carolina, the shots weren't fired, and yet all the great disruption. So the warrior sensibility of, I'm going to stand here and go into this unknown, and I know that it could really work against me. I know that I might not make it through this. I don't care. I'm still going to cross that bridge and take something up into the mountains and give to somebody. That warrior sensibility of, I must stay upright. I must go forward. I must follow the road, even if it dips down and it disappears. I'll still follow it into its disappearance, and perhaps my disappearance, or maybe my appearance somewhere else. We don't know.
That is a beautiful way to put it. And I certainly feel that it's true. That's very true. And being able to take one foot in front of the other and make a step. And most importantly, everything is a personal choice. Like, everybody has their own way of grieving, their own way of speaking, their own way of going crazy. I mean, we're witnessing that right now. People are mentally ill about this, and they are reaching out and looking for the signs and the messages and the poetry to bring them back, like you would any disaster. The teacher appears when the student is ready. That's how I feel now, that we really need to embrace that and be able to say, okay, each of us individually, this is our time. We're going to be different. I don't like going out. I'm sorry. I don't see myself at the food distribution place right now. But I have neighbor kids who are like Lord of the Flies right now. They need some help. And my past was as a teacher. So every day they come over and we play and we do fun things and we make cupcakes or we do something that's interesting for them. So that's my way of giving back and being able to say, hey, I don't have a lot of money, but I want to be able to support them because I love them so much. Everything that is moving me forward is coming from love. And I want to feel that that's going to bring us back. Maybe I'm Peter Pan, but I just feel that I want to clap 3 times and poof, we'll all be back being us.
Marilyn, that's a lovely, lovely thing to say to close us. And before we go, tell people how they can follow what you do, follow your work. So give them a sense of that.
I really appreciate that. So it's speakingoftravel.net is my website. You can really just Google Speaking of Travel and it will come if you listen to Spotify or iHeart or it's podcast globally as well as WWNC. But again, right now they're in emergency mode. So thank you to them. I want to kind of give a shout out to my partners and colleagues at WWNC and iHeartRadio because they have really managed to create community, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and just before we go, I would like to also say that Davine Dial at WPVM-FM is doing the same thing on the community radio station where we broadcast this show. So we got to come together. I appreciate you coming together with me. Thank you ever so much for this time in the middle of all the other stuff you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for giving me that time and platform, and we'll stay in touch.
We will. There you go, my friends. Thus ends my conversation with Marilyn Ball. If you are thinking of traveling, speaking of travel, her website is a terrific place to go for not only listening to Marilyn's great podcast, but also many travel tips, including things like get a luggage strap for your luggage, drink more water, what kind of vitamins to take, all those things that you need to know when you're traveling. Short distances or long distances. Either way, it's a good resource to take a look at. And by the time you listen to this show, the news will have cycled on to other things, and Western North Carolina and the Asheville area will still be repairing itself, cleaning up. This is a long-haul situation. I am still seeing articles about the River Arts District in The Guardian and in New York Times referencing what happens after the disaster hits. So just because it drops out of the news doesn't mean folks aren't still struggling to put things together again. Most of these disasters take years and years and years to repair, so it's really worth keeping all those folks in mind. And some of them are my family members and friends, and some of the folks I'll never know. And yet still I understand the community, and I'm grateful we have people like Marilyn willing to come on and discuss her sensibilities. I'm most grateful about her comments regarding the warrior sensibility. That really did mean a lot to me. And if you would like to get a musical, historical sense of the Swannanoa Black Mountain area, Rihanna Giddens, who is the artistic director for Silk Road Ensemble, just released an old-time work song titled Swannanoa Tunnel. And it's about the collapse of a mountainside train tunnel during its construction in the late 1800s. And here's what Rihanna Giddens said a couple of days ago on NPR about Swannanoa Tunnel, and I'm quoting, "This is a grieving song for then and now. The Swannanoa Tunnel was being created by convict laborers. This was backbreaking, unbelievably difficult work. People died along the way. Cave-ins, such as the one that inspired the song, happened on a regular basis. This was a type of song that would keep a large group of people who are laboring together in sync with spaces for pickaxes to come down. This is a grieving song, you know. It was a grieving song for these men who lost their lives, and now it's a grieving song for a whole nother tragedy." If you would like to hear the whole piece on NPR, you can Google "New Recording of a Tragedy in Swannanoa Happens as Area Recovers from Hurricane." It was aired October the 15th, 2024. p.m. at 7:28 a.m. Eastern Time and heard on Morning Edition. And if you would like to see Rihanna Giddens and Silk Road Ensemble perform the piece, Swannanoa Tunnel, you can find it on YouTube. And with that, my friends, we've arrived at the time to say goodbye. So thanks ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, thank you, Devine Dio, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. I certainly do appreciate it. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. I would love to hear from you. What's going on in your world, especially if you're in Asheville and you'd like to send me an email. I would appreciate hearing from you. Navé at jamesnavé.com. I'd also like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops, we gather every Saturday morning, noon Eastern Time, and every Thursday afternoon, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We gather for an hour and spend about 10 minutes generating a piece of writing and the rest of the time reading and discussing. It's always free, and I offer it with my creative collaborator, Allegra Houston. ImaginativeStorm.com is where you can go to find out more about that. So if you would like to do something for free and enjoy a community of writers, the door is always open. I do appreciate it. And again, thank you ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, and I do hope you come back sometime very soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.